Sometimes you just see an image and it just stops you in your tracks. And that image, for a lot of people, was J35, the orca mother, carrying her deceased calf for days. It was back in 2018. And it really captured the world's attention. And tragically, it seems like history might be repeating itself.
Yeah.
So today we're going to take a deep dive into the world of southern resident killer whales.
Okay.
Specifically, J35's story. Our main source today is going to be a recent article by Evan Bush from NBC News. But this isn't just about one animal's grief. It kind of connects to some bigger questions about animal emotions, the struggles of an endangered species, and how everything in the ecosystem is interconnected.
Yeah, it's fascinating how this one orca's experience can open up so many different things to look into.
Right. So let's start with J35. What happened to her recently?
Well, so as you mentioned, this actually isn't the first time that J35, she's also known as Tahlequah, has experienced this kind of loss.
Right.
Back in December 2020, she was spotted with a new calf. But citizen scientists, those folks who are out there watching these whales, pretty quickly noticed that the calf was struggling. And sadly, their concerns were confirmed.
It's heartbreaking that she lost another calf. And this isn't an isolated incident. Studies show that most southern resident calves don't even make it past their first year.
Yeah, that's right. So researchers like Brad Hansen from the Northwest Fisheries Science Center officially confirmed the calf's death. And they observed J35 carrying the deceased calf, pushing it around on her head. It's just a really stark reminder of how fragile life is, especially for this endangered population.
It makes you wonder, does she understand what's happening? Is she feeling a sense of loss? Grief, even?
Right.
I mean, is it even possible for animals to experience grief like humans do?
That's a question that scientists have been kind of grappling with for a long time. And while we obviously can't ask J35 directly how she's feeling, there's growing evidence that suggests that animals, particularly intelligent social species like orcas, do experience a range of emotions.
Okay, so what kind of evidence are we talking about?
Well, Joe Gatos, a scientist with the CDOC Society, has been studying these orcas for years. And he points out that whales have similar neurotransmitters. Those are the chemicals that transmit signals in the brain.
Right.
And they also have similar brain structures that relate to social emotions, just like humans and other mammals do. So basically, the hardware for grief is there.
Okay, so their brains are wired for it.
Yeah.
But is there anything in their behavior that supports this idea?
Absolutely. I mean, her carrying her deceased calf for an extended period is definitely suggestive. And this isn't just speculation. Similar behaviors have been observed in other species, species that are known for their intelligence and social bonds, like dolphins and primates. There's actually a documented case of a dolphin mother who refused to let go of her deceased calf for weeks.
Wow. That's a really sobering thought. Makes you realize how fragile these populations are and how deeply they can feel.
Yeah.
So when scientists talk about animal grief, are we just projecting our own emotions onto them? Or is there something more going on?
That's a really valid question.
Yeah.
And it speaks to the larger debate about animal consciousness and sentience. Joe Gatos actually put it really well when he said, we have the same neurotransmitters that they have. We have the same hormones that they have. Why shouldn't we also have the same emotions that they have? We don't have the market cornered on emotions. And so I think it's fair to say that she is grieving or mourning.
It's a powerful statement.
It is.
Really challenges us to rethink our relationship with the animal kingdom.
It does, and it highlights how much we still don't know about the inner lives of these amazing creatures.
It's incredible to think that J35's story is just one small window into the larger world of orcas, a world that's facing some pretty serious challenges. She's part of the southern resident killer whale population, which are critically endangered, right?
That's right. The southern residents are a small and struggling population. They were listed as endangered all the way back in 2005. And since then, the situation has only gotten worse.
How many are left?
73.
Wow.
There are only 73 individuals left.
Only 73. Wow. That's a tiny number.
Yeah.
Hard to believe how dire the situation is.
Yeah.
So what's causing this decline? Is it habitat loss?
Okay.
Pollution.
So there are multiple factors at play. But their biggest threat is the lack of Chinook salmon. Which is their primary food source.
So their main food source is disappearing.
Right.
What's happening to the salmon?
It's a complex issue, but dams and habitat along vital rivers, like the Lower Snake River, they restrict salmon access and survival. These dams block the salmon's migration routes, so they can't get to their spawning grounds.
So it's like a chain reaction. We build dams, the salmon suffer, And then the orcas who depend on those salmon pay the price.
Huh.
It's a stark reminder of how interconnected everything is.
Exactly. What we do to one part of the ecosystem can have really far-reaching consequences. And in this case, the consequences are really devastating for the southern resident orcas.
Are there any conservation efforts in place to help them? I mean, is there any hope for this population?
Yeah, so there are some really smart people working on this, trying to save the southern residents.
Yeah.
But it's an uphill battle. It is incredibly hard to restore a salmon run once it's been disrupted.
Right.
But there is hope. Washington State has actually invested over $1 billion in programs to help these orcas.
$1 billion. That's a serious commitment.
It is.
What are they doing with that money?
Well, they're kind of taking a multi-pronged approach, tackling the issue from different angles. So they're working on restoring critical habitat, they're trying to reduce pollution from industrial chemicals, and they're even implementing regulations to try to minimize vessel noise and disturbance to the orcas.
Okay, so they're trying to address the root causes of the problem, not just the symptoms. That's encouraging.
Yeah.
But, we have to remember that J35 lost her calf.
Right.
Are these conservation efforts also focused on ensuring that future generations of these orcas can survive?
You bring up a really crucial point. Protecting females and their calves is absolutely paramount for the population's survival. But as Michael Weiss, the research director at the Center for Whale Research, points out, about 70% to 80% of calves that researchers are able to document and give identifying numbers survive their first year.
Wow.
So we're talking about a very high mortality rate for these calves.
That's terrifying. So even if a calf is born healthy, its chances of making it to adulthood are slim.
Exactly. That's why that focus on habitat restoration and pollution reduction is so critical. Those factors directly impact the health and survival of these young orcas.
It seems like a race against time. Are there any signs that these efforts are making a difference?
There are some glimmers of hope. Recently, J62, another orca in the population, gave birth to a calf that appears to be thriving. Researchers describe it as very robust.
Oh, wow.
Which is encouraging.
So it's a real mixed bag of hope and despair.
Yeah.
It's just incredible to think about J35's capacity for grief and how her story is intertwined with the larger struggles of her population.
Right.
It really makes you wonder what we can learn from her resilience.
I think her story offers a really profound lesson in resilience. It's a reminder that even when faced with unimaginable grief, life goes on. There's an inherent drive to survive, to adapt, to find hope, even in the darkest of times.
That's a powerful message, especially in a world that often feels overwhelmed by bad news. We tend to focus on the negative, the things that are going wrong. But J35's story reminds us that nature is full of resilience, that even in the most challenging circumstances, life finds a way.
Exactly. And that resilience isn't just about individual survival. It's about the continuation of a species. It's about passing on knowledge and traditions to future generations.
You're right. It really does make you think. And, earlier you mentioned pollution.
Yeah.
What kind of pollution are we talking about? Is it stuff we can see, like, plastic in the ocean?
Right.
Or is it something more insidious?
Well, there's definitely the visible pollution, right? The debris and trash that endangers marine life.
Yeah.
But for orcas, one of the biggest threats comes from industrial chemicals, things like PCBs.
PCBs.
Yeah.
I vaguely remember those from chemistry class.
Yeah.
But how do those end up in the orcas?
Well, these chemicals were really widely used in a lot of things, like electrical equipment and paints. And even though they were banned decades ago, they're incredibly persistent in the environment. Like, they don't break down easily.
Oh, wow.
And because they accumulate in the food chain, top predators, like orcas, end up with the highest concentrations in their bodies.
So they're eating fish that have already ingested these chemicals, and it just builds up over time.
Exactly. And these PCBs, they build up in the orcas' bodies, specifically in their blubber. And that's where it gets really dangerous. They interfere with their immune systems.
Oh, wow.
Making them more vulnerable to diseases. They can also disrupt hormone function, affecting their reproductive health and the health of their calves.
It's scary to think that something we created, like, decades ago is still having such a profound impact on these animals today. It's like a ghost from the past haunting them.
Yeah, it really is. And it really underscores the importance of responsible manufacturing and waste disposal practices, right?
Right.
We really have to think about those long-term consequences of what we put into the environment.
Absolutely. So we've talked about the lack of salmon, pollution from PCBs, the efforts to restore their habitat. But what about noise pollution?
Yeah.
I've read that orcas rely heavily on sound to communicate and navigate.
Right.
Is that also a factor?
It's a huge factor. Orcas use echolocation, which means they emit sounds and listen for the echoes to map their surroundings and find prey.
Oh, wow.
But increased boat traffic, especially from large vessels, creates a cacophony of noise, and it interferes with their ability to communicate and hunt effectively.
So it's almost like they can't see as well
Right.
through all that noise.
Really
And if they can't find food as easily, that just puts even more stress on an already struggling population.
Exactly. That's why Washington State is implementing those vessel regulations that we talked about earlier, trying to create quieter zones and limit the number of boats that are allowed in critical orca habitat.
It's encouraging to see those efforts taking place.
Yeah.
It shows that we're willing to acknowledge the impact we have and make adjustments to minimize the harm we're causing.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that scientists are monitoring these whales.
Mm-hmm.
What exactly are they looking for, and how do they even track a species that is so wide-ranging?
Well, researchers use a variety of methods to monitor the southern resident orcas. So they conduct visual surveys from boats and planes, and they use photographs to identify individual whales based on their unique markings.
Okay.
They also use underwater microphones, called hydrophones, to record their vocalizations,
Cool.
which can tell us a lot about their behavior and social interactions. And increasingly, they're using drones to observe them from above,
Yeah.
which gives them kind of a broader perspective on their movements and interactions.
Wow. It's amazing how technology is being used to help us understand these creatures better.
Yeah.
And it's not just scientists who are involved, right? You mentioned citizen scientists earlier.
Absolutely. Citizen scientists play a really vital role in orca research and conservation. They're often the first to spot new calves, observe any unusual behaviors, or report potential threats like entanglements and fishing gear.
Right.
And their observations provide valuable data points that help scientists kind of piece together a more comprehensive picture of the southern resident population.
So it's really a collective effort.
It is.
Scientists, policymakers, everyday citizens, all working together. It's a powerful reminder that we're not powerless in the face of these challenges. But, it's hard to talk about orcas without acknowledging the emotional connection people have with these animals.
Right.
They're so intelligent, social, majestic creatures.
Yeah.
And J35's story in particular really tugs at the heartstrings.
It does. It speaks to something deeper than just scientific data or conservation strategies,
Yeah.
It touches on our innate empathy, our ability to connect with another being's suffering, even across species boundaries.
It really makes you wonder what she must be feeling. Having lost 2 calves now, to keep swimming, to keep going, despite that loss, it's almost inspiring.
Yeah.
What can we learn from her strength?
I think J35's story offers a really profound lesson in resilience.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that even in the face of unimaginable grief, life goes on.
It's a powerful message, especially in a world that often feels overwhelmed by bad news.
Yeah.
We tend to focus on the negative, the things that are going wrong.
Yeah.
But J35's story reminds us that nature is full of resilience.
It is.
That even in the most challenging circumstances, life finds a way.
Exactly. And that resilience isn't just about individual survival, right? It's about the continuation of a species. It's about passing on knowledge and traditions to future generations.
That brings up an interesting point. We've talked about the physical threats to orcas, but what about the cultural impact of losing so many individuals?
Right.
Especially experienced mothers like J35.
You're touching on a really crucial aspect of conservation that's often overlooked. Losing an experienced mother like J35, it's a blow to the entire orca community. Imagine all the knowledge that she had about finding salmon, navigating complex currents, even social customs.
Right.
That knowledge dies with her.
It's like losing a library.
Right?
A repository of generations of accumulated wisdom.
Exactly. And that loss can have a ripple effect throughout the population, impacting their ability to adapt and survive in a changing environment.
So it's not just about the number of orcas, but the knowledge and traditions that could be lost.
Right.
If the population continues to decline. How do scientists even begin to measure the impact of those cultural losses?
It's a really challenging area of research, but scientists are developing methods to try to track cultural evolution in animals, including orcas.
Oh.
They're analyzing vocalizations, social interactions, and foraging patterns to try to understand how knowledge is transmitted and how those losses impact the group's overall well-being.
So, are they finding that orcas, like humans, have distinct cultures?
They are. They're finding that orcas, like humans, have distinct cultures, different ways of doing things that are passed down through generations.
So it's like losing a piece of their history, their heritage. And it makes you wonder, what happens to those unique traditions,
Mm-hmm.
those dialects,
Mm-hmm.
those ways of life, if the population dwindles down to just a handful of individuals?
It's a really sobering thought.
Yeah.
And it highlighted the importance of protecting not just individual animals, but also the cultural diversity within a species. We're losing something really precious when we lose those distinct cultures, those different ways of being in the world.
It makes you realize that conservation isn't just about numbers. It's about preserving the richness and complexity of life on Earth.
Yeah.
It's about protecting those things that make each species unique and valuable.
You've hit the nail on the head. Biodiversity isn't just about having a lot of different species. It's about the intricate web of relationships between those species, the cultures they've developed, the ways they interact with their environment. It's about safeguarding the tapestry of life in all its vibrant diversity.
This deep dive has been so insightful. We've gone from J35's personal story of loss to these much broader questions about conservation and cultural diversity and how everything's interconnected in the ecosystem. It's really a lot to process.
It is. And, I think it's important to acknowledge that feeling of being overwhelmed. It's easy to just feel helpless when you think about these large-scale challenges. But that's really where hope comes in.
Hope. But the situation seems so dire. Only 73 southern residents left. Dwindling salmon population, pollution, noise, habitat loss. I mean, where's the hope in all of that?
The hope is in action. It lies in the fact that people are working tirelessly to protect these orcas, to restore their habitat, to address the threats they face. There are scientists, policymakers, conservation groups, and just everyday citizens who are dedicated to making a difference.
So the hope comes from the collective effort.
Right.
Realizing that we're not alone in this fight.
Exactly. And that's where J35's story, I think, becomes even more powerful. Because she's not just a symbol of loss and grief, she's also a symbol of resilience, of the enduring power of nature to adapt and survive, even in the most challenging circumstances.
It's interesting you say that because when we think about resilience, we often focus on the physical aspects, like the ability to withstand hardship, to bounce back from adversity. But what about the resilience of their culture?
Right.
Their traditions, their knowledge? How do those things factor into their survival?
That's a brilliant question. And it's something that scientists are only beginning to understand. We're starting to realize that cultural diversity is just as important as genetic diversity when it comes to conservation.
So can you explain what you mean by cultural diversity? I mean, we're talking about orcas, not different human societies.
Right, but orcas, like many intelligent social animals, they have these distinct cultures, They have unique vocalizations, social structures, foraging techniques, even ways of playing that are passed down through generations. And these cultural variations can actually give them an edge in adapting to different environments and challenges.
So it's like having a toolkit of different strategies for survival.
Right.
The more diverse that toolkit, the better equipped they are to cope with change.
Precisely. And that's why losing individuals like J35, who carry so much cultural knowledge, is so devastating. It's like losing a piece of their collective memory, their history, their ability to adapt.
It's a reminder that conservation isn't just about saving species. It's about saving the intricate web of relationships and behaviors and traditions that make each species unique.
Absolutely. It's about protecting that tapestry of life in all of its complexity. And that requires, I think, a shift in our thinking, recognizing that we're not just managing populations, we're safeguarding entire cultures.
So where do we go from here? What can we do to ensure that these orca cultures, these unique ways of being in the world, don't just disappear?
I think the first step is awareness. The more we understand about orca cultures, the more we'll appreciate their value and the urgency of protecting them. And supporting research that explores these cultural nuances is really crucial.
So educating ourselves and others about the importance of cultural diversity and conservation.
Right.
What else?
Well, we need to address the root causes of the threats that they face.
Yeah.
That means tackling climate change, reducing pollution, protecting critical habitat, and finding more sustainable solutions to our fishing practices. And, these actions, they'll benefit not just orcas, but the entire ecosystem.
It's a reminder that everything's connected. The fate of the orcas is intertwined with the health of our oceans, and ultimately, the health of our planet.
Exactly. And that's why J35's story is so important. It's a call to action. It's a reminder that our choices matter. and that we have a responsibility to be better stewards of the natural world.
You've given us so much to think about today.
Oh, it's been my pleasure.
Is there anything else that you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Just this. Never underestimate the power of hope. Hope is what drives us to act, to make a difference. And hope is what sustains us in the face of challenges.
Well said. J35's story may be one of loss and grief, but it's also a story of resilience and of the enduring spirit of nature. And that's a message I think we can all carry with us. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of southern resident killer whales. We hope you've learned something new, been inspired to take action, and most importantly, that you'll continue to explore the wonders of the natural world.